50% of the supply of dollars is outside of U.S. banking systems. It's an international currency. And that's the difference. You cannot do anything to the dollar that is groundbreaking without impacting the rest of the world. Now, everyone already knows that 2008 proved to the international community that the U.S. banking system, the Wall Street, it cannot be the leader of the 21st century. So everyone already knows this marriage of the dollar as the reserve currency is a dysfunctional marriage. The problem is the price of divorce, in other words, replacing the dollar, scares the married couple even more. There's going to be 10 billion people in the world, 400 million of them in America. So it shouldn't be the reserve currency. When and where is it going to change? Nobody knows.
Thanks for watching this RTD interview. Don't forget to pick up your RTD Scary George round, only available at stbullion.com. Now enjoy this interview. Welcome. I'm excited to have returning guest, Mr. Lior Gantz. He's the creator and founder of Wealth Research Group. Today he's joining us to share his thoughts on the financial markets, global economy, and a variety of other subject matter. So Lior Gantz, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to join us. We're at the end of 2019, a couple of weeks left, and then we're heading into a new decade. And I'm curious to find out at this current moment, what you're keeping your eye on, what concerns you, what excites you. Before we get to that, let's start off what concerns you the most as we end 2019.
Well, I think the most important concern that I have is that the Federal Reserve has not changed its policies or its outlook. It's still operating in 2008 mentality. It's still operating in 2008 survival mode. They're doing the same strategies as they've done a decade ago. Could you think about the person you were in 2008 compared to the person you are right now? Can you tell me that you're operating in the same way? Can you tell me that your thoughts are the same thoughts, etc.? You've grown, you've developed, you've changed. And what has the Federal Reserve done? It does QE programs. It buys mortgage-backed securities and it buys bonds to suppress interest rates. And it slashes interest rates mostly. That's what it does. It does QE programs, slashes interest rates, and see what the market reacts, and then acts from there. And that's just not enough. Now, when Trump came into office, he said, "Man, this is not enough. I have to do something else. I have to bring America into 2016, 2017, etc." So he cut corporate tax rates. He started renegotiating the trade with China and other countries as well, but mostly with everything that America has to do with China. And so the government is starting to think differently, to move on. The Fed isn't, and that really concerns me because for two reasons. One, we've been on a 10-year expansion. I've talked about in other interviews where I sort of describe the landscape as such. Could you imagine a building where at the second floor or the penthouse, whatever you want to think about, there's a closely knit amount of people. The government is there, and the heads of corporations are there, and the rich are there. And there's a party going on in that floor, on the penthouse, the second level, whatever you want to imagine. There's a party, and the DJ is the Federal Reserve. It's cranking up the music, and everyone's having a great time. And it's because it's giving up this great music all the time. There's drinks everywhere. The people, the population, they're hearing that there's a party on the top level, but they don't understand too much because they can't really hear it. They only know it's there. And that was what was sold to the general population in 2008, that there's a DJ. Everyone's gonna have a great party, and you will be included. Even if you're not invited, there will be a trickle effect, they called it. There will be something where you participate as well. The problem is that the people on that floor did not open the doors, did not open the windows, did not punch a hole in the ground. You cannot hear the party and you cannot enjoy it. You're not drinking the drinks. You're not having the food. You're not dancing. And that is the problem with what the Fed has done. It's created a party that only helps 10% of the population, 10 to 15% of the population, now probably 20, 25, because there's just more people that get invited. But certainly for most Americans, for most Europeans, the recovery of the past 10 years did not so much include them. Maybe they can hear the music, but they can't really enjoy the party. And that's their argument. They're saying, look, we are financing this DJ. This is taxpayer money. This is deficits that we will have to pay for as much as you will have to pay for it. But it's unbelievable that only you get to enjoy it. So what are we going to do? And the government is trying to be the one that says, hey, let's change the rules here. Let's include more people. Let's see what we can do. And to not only grow the wealth pie, which it's growing, there's no doubt the world is getting richer by the second, but it's getting richer and fewer people are eating the bigger pie. And that's what concerns me. It's not so much how the world is behaving on a financial sense, but more how it's acting on a social economic sense, because obviously technology is amazing. It's booming. The world is so much better than it was in terms of comfort. Could you imagine trying to listen to the amount of music, to the amount of information that you devour in a day on YouTube? Could you imagine just trying to store that in cassettes or CDs or whatever in the house? Yeah. Could you imagine trying to calculate everything that you can do on your phone and taking pictures and everything that a piece of phone can do? And it's not, you can fit it in the pocket or whatever. The world is becoming amazing. And much more westernized, much more comfortable. You got planes that take you everywhere. There's a plane out that goes from Europe to Australia direct, like 20 hours in the air without. We live in incredible times. The problem is, if you can imagine, you have a bucket and you're standing inside of a great gushing stream of water, pure water, gray water. But for most people, they're holding the bucket upside down, so the water is just hitting it and not getting in. And that's why they're really frustrated, because they see all this abundance but they get none of it. And when the masses get upset about it, there's usually a short-term fix instead of a systematic structural fix from the core. And that's where my fear stems from, that the solutions that we will be introduced to are not the solutions that really would help in the long term. In fact, the solutions might be to shrink, inadvertently to shrink the wealth pie. Now that might be fun to see that the rich are not having a good time, but you're not going to have a good time either. In other words, you're going to move from productive capitalism that is not inclusive to unproductive capitalism that no one wins in. And that's my biggest. If you go to wealthresearchgroup.com/reset, we talk about it also in wealthresearchgroup.com/attack, where our issue is that we think that America has done a number of key mistakes along the way, and its population is just not understanding that for the most part, the baby boom miracle is over. They have America doesn't have any specific advantages over other countries that they had during the 20th century, and that Americans should consider the fact that they might need to live off of this $30,000 to $50,000 a year median income, which in the U.S., if you divide the tax obligations by taxpayers, you reach a point where each taxpayer owes about $42,000 annually. So you are living in a country with permanent deficits that cannot sustain them. And the solutions that will be introduced in this new decade, like you say, Mike, they could be quite controversial. And depending on the president, depending on the environment, that's worrisome, because it introduces a lot of uncertainty.
Right. So to go back to that analogy initially about the music top floor, people can hear it, but they really can't. They're not
Yeah.
enjoying the full effects of the music. So it sounds like the music, the party, the DJ, the Federal Reserve, central bankers around the world, they're going to try to increase the volume or have the governments somehow get the people involved to where it's not going to come to complete stop just yet. So in analogy, in a sense, the music will increase louder but one day it has to come to an end. The party can't go on forever. So in the meantime, it's going to get louder so that more people can hear it on the bottom floor until it stops. Give us a scenario how that might play out.
Yeah. So look, for the Federal Reserve, it has a number of tricky issues that it needs to work out. The Fed's fund rate is so low right now that in a downturn, their ability to cut rates to zero, for example, as they've done previously in this decade, it's not a meaningful tool anymore. In other words, most corporations and the U.S. government have already refinanced or financed their obligations at very low rates. So when you introduce low rates again, you're not shocking them with some amazing upside that they haven't seen before. That's one thing to remember. In other words, the effectiveness of this is like you going to one of the best steakhouses in New York City. You're sitting there; it's amazing. You've just had an amazing steak. The chef goes table to table and comes to your table and says, "Mike, how's that steak?" You say, "Amazing," and you say, "Okay." And the chef tells you, "I'm going to give you the biggest steak in the house for free." You tell him, "Look, I'm full. I'm done. He tells you it's prime. You have never seen anything like it. You tell him, "Look, I'm full. Would you mind taking a rain check on that?" Because that's what the Fed is proposing. It's proposing something that the government and corporations don't need that much. The difference between corporations and the government, the corporations are liable for their debts, right? If they get into debt and they cannot finance it with either rolling the debt over or with earnings, then they default. So corporations are living in the real world. Governments, they can roll over their debts for 50 to 100 years. You've seen these bonds that are getting introduced in first world countries. So the government will be able to enjoy these low rates. If the Fed cuts rates to zero again, Trump or whoever comes next will refinance the national debt 50 to 100 years into the future, because that's the right way to do if you're a politician. If you can kick the can down the road to 50 years from now at no cost, in other words, with no interest payments, my God, why not, right?
Watch this. So will the world sit around and watch that? Will they watch the leading currency of the world refinance for 50 to 100 years, knowing that that's not a solution? It's just a patch job.
Well, two things, and you're correct, and that's getting to my next point. So if you look at wealthresearch.com/bear, you'll see how I introduce 11 proprietary strategies to handle a bear market. And the reason I'm telling you about a bear market is because of this. When you do what you just said, when you lower rates to zero and let the U.S. government refinance for 50 to 100 years, the message the Federal Reserve is sending to the rest of the world is, we are the reserve currency for everyone, but we are U.S.-centered. And that's not the message that the Federal Reserve wants to send right now. In other words, if you were a central bank only of the U.S. and you serve only the U.S., which the Fed is supposed to do, they would cut rates to zero by nightfall. Why not? You save about $1.6 billion a day in interest payments to the U.S. to the taxpayer, or about $600 billion a year. You can save taxpayers $6 billion a year if you cut rates to zero. Washington finances the debt, and creditors from around the world, on a free market, they decide that they want to lend the government money for some reason, right? It's going on already. Europe is financing its debt at negative rates. In other words, people are willing to lend Germany money, lend Bulgaria money, lend Sweden, Norway, Holland, etc. money, and get less than the principal in return 10 years down the road. So it's already happening in Japan, and it's a norm. It's not something that you're introducing. There's already $17 trillion of debt that is issued at negative rates floating around. So, but the problem is, as you said, these are mostly contained currencies. These are mostly currencies that are not being used on an international basis. 50% of the supply of dollars is outside of U.S. banking systems. It's an international currency, and that's the difference. You cannot do anything to the dollar that is groundbreaking without impacting the rest of the world. Now, everyone already knows that 2008 proved to the international community that the U.S. banking system, the Wall Street, it cannot be the leader of the 21st century. So everyone already knows this marriage of the dollar as the reserve currency is a dysfunctional marriage. The problem is the price of divorce, in other words, replacing the dollar, scares the married couple even more. It's a easy analogy to understand. A couple is married, they fight all the time, they know that they should get divorced, but they fear the life that awaits them after the divorce. So they stay married. They stay married because that's the devil they know, and it's better than the devil they don't know. So that's where the world is. Everyone understands that a country of 330 million people in a world of 8 billion people, in other words, a country that makes up less than 5% of the world's population, it's true that they're the biggest economy, but that's going to be replaced in a few years as well. Chinese GDP is going to surpass America's GDP in this decade, in this new decade. India is going to be the most populated country in the world, surpassing China. And Africa is going to double in size between now and 2050. There's going to be 10 billion people in the world, 400 million of them in America. The economic activity that America can produce will probably not be, as it is today, a quarter of the world's activity. So it shouldn't be the reserve currency. When and where is it going to change? Nobody knows. But that's part of the reason that investing is very difficult. You need to diversify. You need to own different asset classes, and you need to do it wisely. That's the reason that we publish wealth research for that particular reason.
Thanks for watching this interview. If you're enjoying content like this, feel free to become a part of the RTD community by becoming a member via Patreon. All it takes is a monthly contribution of about $5 a month for more great content such as this. Just scroll down beneath this video here and click the Patreon link, and then hit this tab right here to become a member of the team. Looking forward to bringing you more great content. Now, let's get back to this interview. Thanks. All right. So moving into 2020, a couple weeks away, new decade, we know about problems. And so what do you think 2020 will look like to kick off this new decade? Are you seeing some issues here in the U.S. or the trade situation, which is reportedly come to a stall? So that's not looking good. And so what do you see in 2020 looking like as of now?
Well, look, from 2016 to 2019, the S&P 500 is up about 70%. That's insane. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. Since the December, last year alone, it's up 35%. That's about 4.5 times its normal yearly gains of about 7.5%. We've had an incredible year. 2019 has been amazing. It's been the best performing year for the stock market since 2013. So we're definitely in a situation where these low interest rates, very low interest rates, and the fact that workers are not unionized, in other words, they can't do much to impact their wages. They don't strike anymore. There's an endless pool of skilled workers around the world, English speakers. There's a way to outsource, high cost manufacturing jobs from the Western world to the East. There's so much money that corporations are making that the stock market is very valuable. We live in what I call an expensive world. If you can imagine, that DJ was not playing music in real terms. It was it was sending in, pumping liquidity into the economy. What is pumping liquidity? It just means that it creates credit or debt that is very cheap. In other words, for 10 years, people, corporations, governments, and rich individuals have been able to borrow at very low rates and buy assets. Because what does a corporation buy? What does a rich institution buy? It doesn't buy food at the grocery store. That's why you don't see epic inflation at the grocery store. You don't see inflation for everyday items. You see inflation in assets, because when I can borrow, funds at 2 and 2.5%, turn around and go to Orlando, Florida, or to Dallas, Texas, or to Phoenix, Arizona, and buy real estate that yields 6 and 7%, I'm making 5% spread over nothing. When I can borrow 2%, when the S&P 500 dividend yield is about 2%, so you're actually getting paid to own stocks, then you do that. And what happens is this institution buys from this institution, and all prices get inflated up based on debt. When you start have to pay the debt down, these prices will start to deflate down. How much will the deflate down? That's the question of all questions. And when will the debt be repaid? That's another question. So if they can roll over this debt, then we can live in an expensive world for a long time. This is not a bubble world so much as an expensive world. In other words, stocks are not outrageously expensive, and they're not in a euphoric mania. Real estate, the same thing. They're expensive, but it's not overwhelmingly expensive. We live in a low growth, low inflation, low unemployment world. And in that world, there are many people that are employed. We're 50 years lows for unemployment, but the employment opportunities are crap. A lot of jobs, a lot of career path. They're not a ladder that you can climb and reach $100,000 or $200,000 or $250,000 a year. Many of them are dead-end jobs. So you do have a job, but whoever makes the money is the corporation and its shareholders, and that's not, for the most part, that's not you. So if we continue to live in that sort of an environment, then this, what we've seen in the last decade, will play out in the coming years as well. I see a change coming because you can listen to the people in the party saying, hey, this party has gone on long enough. Not the people at the bottom telling you, hey, I want to join the party. The people at the party itself are saying, whoa, remember that at any moment these people can barge these doors. They're much more than us. We're 10%, they're 90%. It's like in Bug Story, right? If the ants ever figure out that they're more than the bugs. So and that's what's going on right now. The patsy are the billionaires. It used to be the deep state. It used to be the Federal Reserve, etc. There's always someone that the general population is looking as the party to blame, and that's the issue. There is going to be a change. There are going to be solutions introduced, and the fear is obviously that they're going to be not the right solutions, because taxing the wealthy, taxing the billionaires on whatever 90% of their or 80% or 70%, when they have to work for more than 6 months out of the year for the government and less than 6 months for themselves, you're creating an economy where people are disincentivized to do many things, especially when most of them conduct some sort of a philanthropy and they bring value. Yeah. Most billionaires, 50% of billionaires, come from innovation. Mm-hmm. So that
lets me know that more people need to think outside the box and begin innovating themselves in an entrepreneurial manner before they're without a job, in a sense.
Well, just remember, Mike, there's money. Mm-hmm. There's money that is looking for good ideas. If people have good ideas, they can knock on doors of private equity firms, and they can sit down with very smart people that can tell them yes or no to their ideas. We do live in a world where the money is centered and then the masses, are working paycheck to paycheck. But if you have a great idea, then you can connect with money much more than before. Could you imagine 30 or 40 years ago, you had a great idea, and where would you go? Could you connect that? Now you can connect online with crowdfunding platforms and get your idea funded in 24 hours. You can Google the top equity firms in the world and send them your business plan. The problem is that most people can't understand that the miracle is over. And if they can understand that, people on the other side of the world, people that are now sleeping while we're doing this interview, 2.5 billion people in the East, in India and in China and in the surrounding areas are going to wake up, and they don't have a problem working 2 jobs, 12-hour days, and providing for their families. When you can understand that you're competing with those people, half of them know English. If you can understand that, then you will get that firecracker in your ass as well, and understand that you have to perform. You have to perform. The gaps are closing, and it's great in terms of the fact that we have more engineers in the world today than ever before. We have more doctors than ever before. We have more of everything, but it means more competition as well. So that's where that's where your head needs to be at.
Interesting. Lior Gantz, as we draw towards the end, I'm curious to get, because you kind of gave us one, give us 3 action steps that Lior Gantz would take for this new decade to set himself apart from the crowd. You gave us kind of one, but if you want to build on another 2 or 3, feel free to do so.
Sure. Look, the first thing I would say is that any person in the Western world needs to diversify its cash savings into gold and silver. If you own fiat currency as a means of saving in other words, if in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years you have obligations and you're saving up for those obligations, take at least 30% of that cash value and convert it into physical gold and silver. What I do, if you go to wealthresearchgroup.com/gold playbook, you'll see the most comprehensive gold and silver investing guide online. And within it, you'll see that what I do is I've taken 24 months. So in other words, 2 years of my lifestyle burn rate, my family unit, whatever we spend as a unit, me, my wife, and our daughter. And I've converted 24 months into physical gold and silver. So if there's a slowdown, if there's a panic, if there's a depression that is even 2 years long, a very long depression, I have converted cash into fiat currency. That's one thing. The second thing is, how do you grow your existing wealth in case that the world keeps chugging along, keeps moving forward without a great depression, without another 2008? How do you create a great investment portfolio? And thirdly, so that's the second part. How do you create a great investment portfolio? But the third part is actually the first part. How do you create capital in the first place? That's the problem that most people face. Not how to invest their capital that they have. Not how to diversify their capital, how to get capital in the first place. Because as I said, 75 million out of 150 million Americans work at jobs that pay less than $50,000 a year. That's half of the working population. Mm-hmm. So you have to figure out how to become more valuable. And you're not only competing with that other guy, you're competing with automation, technology, and robotics. So you're competing with other employees that are not even human, that can work 24/7. We are transitioning into a thinking world. People have to become better decision makers. They have to have more emotional control. The skills that are important for the 21st century are not the skills that were important in the 20th century. If in the 20th century you needed to screw levers or do stuff that's delicate with your hands, that's done with. Now you need to, Jeff Bezos said it in a very nice way. He said, look, a high-paid executive is paid to sit around for most of the day and make 2 or 3 key decisions that will impact the earnings of the company in a meaningful way. And that's true. Most people need to understand that if they want to have more worth for the marketplace, they need to read more. They need to know more. They need to network more. That's what's important right now. They need to lead more. If you're not reading right now, if you're not reading books, you're regressing. If you're not a student of, of the business that you're in, you're regressing. You need to become an expert at whatever you're doing, and that's how you can write your own ticket in life and become indispensable to your clients. If you find a niche that you like and that you're good at, that is what the 21st century is going to be all about. I can give you a very nice example of that. Look, hairdressers are not, they're specializing right now in mini niches. There's a guy who does only eyebrows. There's a guy who does only your shave. Even, something as fundamental as getting your haircut is getting into mini industries. Mm-hmm. If you're looking for somebody to help you with marketing, for example, there's one company that only does banners. There's another company that only does this. The world is becoming more and more specialized, and you need to figure out where you fit in that mix. And that's how you climb that ladder much faster than what the U.S. economy will continue to grow at, which is about 2.5%. Don't expect anything else.
Right. Lior Gantz, as always, it's great to hear your thoughts and opinions on what's going on. And so can you, for those that might just be coming across Lior Gantz for the first time, can you point me a direction and so they can find out more about you?
Yeah, go to the wealthresearchgroup.com website. On the first thing you'll see is where you can subscribe to the free newsletter, and you'll see a wealth of special reports with regards to anything from gold, silver, cryptocurrencies, the general economy, Trump, you name it, investing principles. It's all out there.
All right, sounds good. Once again, Lior Gantz, it's been great having you on the show. Looking forward to getting your thoughts in 2020, definitely as things get started and go from there. But once again, thanks for joining us here. Appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.